You're listening to Beyond the Measure, Episode 10. Listen as I, a young choir director, and my husband, a young composer, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Measure, the next episode here today. We're kind of laughing because we were just talking about some funny stuff beforehand, but I'm your host, Christian, here with my beautiful co-host.
Oh, thank you, Kara.
And we have a very special guest on our show today. We have Mr. Travis Lowery. We know Travis as the director, or is it co-director, or just one of the
Assistant conductor.
Assistant conductor. I never know. So many people have different titles for different similar things. So the assistant conductor for the Abilene Chamber Singers, which is a professional ensemble of choral singers here in Abilene. And we'll let Travis tell you a little bit more about it later. But that's how we know Travis. We've sung with the group.
Couple times.
A few times, I guess.
You've done it more than I have.
I've done it a little bit more. We sang Messiah with them a couple years ago, which was fun. I think that was
2019 y'all's first one.
Yes,
okay.
that was the first time we sang with y'all.
Incidentally, that's the last time we did that.
It is, and that was actually our first time singing with the Chamber Singers as well, though, and that was fun, and our first time singing Messiah. Yeah. Because it was. We had not even looked at that music at all, and we literally
did not look at it.
We literally sight read.
Week.
We had it was finals week.
Oh yeah, y'all are still in school at the time.
And so it was the week of, and we had those 3 or 4 rehearsals before the performance, and we picked up the Messiah scored and basically sight read for those first couple rehearsals, the whole part one.
His yoke is not so easy.
No, indeed it's not.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, well, cool. Well, Travis, thank you for being on the show with us.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, and now you're the assistant conductor at Abilene Chamber Singers now, but you live in Stephenville, correct?
I do live in Stephenville, yeah.
So what do you do over there?
I've been in Stephenville since 2014, and I am the music director of music ministries is the actual official title on the door of my office, at First United Methodist Church in Stephenville. Cool. So been there, like I say, since 2014.
Cool. That's great. And now I know you direct the choir over there. Is it just the choir, or is there some other music related things
there
as well?
Are 3 ensembles for adults. We have the chancel choir, and I also lead the worship band, and so and the other adult ensemble is the handbell choir.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Handbells. So
there are also excuse me, Siegfried is calling me on my phone. But there are several other ensembles that sort of meet on a case-to-case basis.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
but one of the most regular of those is the hand chime choir for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. So we've had a youth handbell group before, but COVID kind of, changed everything. And so we've had trouble getting that group back together, but the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders are doing okay. And they perform 2 or 3 times each semester.
Okay.
So yeah, they do, and they do great work. They actually, we say they go on the road. So they performed for us for a worship service this semester, and they also went across town to Oakdale United Methodist Church, and then also to Greens Creek United Methodist Church.
Cool.
And we pull kids from all over town.
That's great.
So,
speaking of handbells, I've only done handbells once. It was so fun though. For a first time, it was.
Was that the same experience that we did?
Yeah, it was at
First Christian, and I don't even think we ended up doing the gig.
Yeah, it was kind of a test the waters. We were thinking about singing at
the church,
on scholarship, but we decided not to. But we went to that one rehearsal and did handbells, and it was lots of fun. But man, they get kind of heavy after a while.
Yeah.
It was fun. I want to do that.
It was
again.
good.
We use I don't know if this was we're certainly not the first people in our. I'm certainly not the first person in our church to do to recommend hand chimes for children, because we obviously owned a set of hand chimes. I didn't have to buy any, but I feel like for like the pre-K through second or third grade, singing is probably the best way for us to teach them about music.
Yeah.
But for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, they're sort of in that run up to like middle school choir, middle school band.
Yeah.
There's no orchestra program in Stephenville, but we have band and choir out there, and so in the run up to that, we sort of teach them as much about literacy as we possibly can.
That's good.
And so hand chimes has sort of proven to be a good way to do that. So most of the time when those kids get to, I think they start band in 5th grade, 5th or 6th. It might be like late 5th grade, like maybe when they're trying to figure out what instrument they're going to play and the band director comes to see them. But I don't know that to be certain. Don't quote me.
Sure.
It's not like we're recording this or anything. But yeah, those kids usually end up being at least having a head start in those programs.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just within your church. Like that's not including, I mean, whatever they're doing in the school. I mean, I would assume and hope they're doing other music stuff as well. But that's a good example.
That's just it. There's not, at least that I'm aware of, there's not a significant presence of elementary music education in Stephenville ISD.
Gotcha.
But the band program is strong. However, I'm fairly certain that they have to do a lot of sort of fundamentals in 5th and 6th grade. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, no, that's kind of interesting but it's good that since there's not as much of a presence there, that at least your church, and I would hope some other churches are able to kind of help fill that gap.
Yeah, and First Baptist, they have they're across the street from us. They have a fairly significant children's choir program as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Cool. Well, how about you go ahead and just kind of tell us your story and kind of how you grew up and kind of how you came to do music and everything and whatever doing music is. You know, that's I guess different for every person, but yeah, feel free to go as in depth with that as you want.
Well, I can't tell you how many times you know, people in one context or another, boy, how long have you been singing, or how long have you been a musician? The answer to that is I do not remember a time when music was not part of my life. I don't remember a time when I was not singing. And that was never more evident to me. Several years ago, I think it was the summer after I finished grad school, I finally we got all our home movies together, and I digitized the whole library of our family home movies, and I found video footage of my mom teaching me a song by rote in it would have been May or June, I think, of 1988. So I wasn't even 2 years old yet. So that's always been a significant part of my life. Like a lot of kids, sort of began formal, if you want to call it formal, training at the piano, just learning the basics of literacy and pitches, rhythms, etc. On that instrument, and that would have been when I was 8 years old. And my first teacher was my mom, and she taught me for about a year, and then I went to Diane Hawley, who in years past, I can't remember when exactly she left or retired, I guess, from Cooper High School. She was the choral director at Cooper. When I was in high school, she was the choral director over there, and stayed with her until I was probably, I think, in 7th or 8th grade, and then I went to Debbie Letts, who actually had been my elementary music teacher at Bonham Elementary when I was a kid. And then sort of overlapping with that, in 6th grade at Lincoln Middle School, I started band, and I was a percussionist from 6th grade through 12th grade. And I was always, I think all through that time, I was singing in some capacity at church at Pioneer Drive Baptist Church here in Abilene. And there were always, I mean, umpteen opportunities to sing and to grow there. And then finally, so I think junior year of high school, I had intended to be in choir that year, and I can't remember what it was. Something prevented me, like a schedule thing or whatever, prevented me from being in choir. And I was finally able to join the group senior year of high school, which was the 03-04 school year. And then so I had one shot, really, to be in the All-State Choir. So I was like, by God, that is going to happen. And so I was in the tenor bass group that year, which was conducted by John Reed, who I'm pretty sure is still at Michigan State. But so that was 2004, and I started. So I left when I graduated from Abilene High. I went first to the University of North Texas. I was there from 04 to 08, and it was one of those great situations where you sort of turn 18 and it's like, all right, have at it. Figure it out, and we'll just drop you in the deep end. And there was no greater deep end for a kid who had grown up in Abilene, Texas, than to be dropped into Denton, Texas. And so it was. I spent 4 years at UNT, and could care less about anything except singing. So like I was always in the practice room. I was always working on music, but just did not care about school. All I wanted to do was sing. And so here years later, I realized, probably should have paid attention in form analysis or whatever. And so, but I figured it out when I went to grad school. I had a 4.0 in grad school. So
Nice.
That's great.
But in 08, I left UNT and came to Hardin-Simmons, and pretty quickly discovered that church music could be my major. I don't know exactly when, but at some point in the transition, I think, from UNT to Hardin-Simmons, I sort of realized that as much as I loved and respected all of my teachers, professors, the people that had influenced me, almost all of whom were teachers in some way, that I would have been miserable doing that. That all I really, really cared about was ministry.
Yeah.
But that the thing that I was good at, that I was going to be actually skilled at in ministry, was music. Why not do that as a career?
Yeah.
And so I walked into Clell Wright's office. Y'all know Clell. Clell was my major. He was my major professor for 3 years at Hardin-Simmons, and I walked into Clell's office, and he and I started Abilene Chamber Singers together in 2013. I walked into Clell's office and said, "Hey man, I think I want to change my major to church music." And he almost rolled his eyes, and he kind of went, "Well, it's about time," And because I think he knew and understood that I really, really loved sacred music and was sort of fascinated by liturgical practices outside my own. And so he was like, "Yeah, it's about time, man. Like, welcome. Here you are, finally."
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, I graduated from Hardin-Simmons in 2012. I spent 2 years at Westminster Presbyterian here in Abilene as the choir director there. Learned a lot in that church. Had the great fortune of having a really supportive pastor during that time, Chris Turner. And Chris, he was very forthcoming with the fact that he was not a musician, but he was also a sort of guiding hand as far as any liturgical practice or any theological questions that I had regarding Reformed liturgy, because I'm a Baptist. I'm still a Baptist. I grew up Baptist, and I sort of masquerade on Wednesdays and Sundays as a Baptist. Yeah. And so I was masquerading back then as a Presbyterian, and so he knew that, he was aware of that, and I was just very grateful to have any kind of
for sure
guidance in that area.
I imagine some pastors are more strict on
their
background.
Yeah, sure.
And everything.
I'm sure, yeah.
So I was there for 2 years, and in 2014, like I said, moved out to Stephenville. Been there since then, and I think in the spring of 2017, I don't really remember what prompted this, but maybe I was gigging more often, or just maybe I felt like I had reached a point where I really just needed more training, instruction, experience, et cetera, and so I started looking for a place to go to grad school, and I went to I had looked at I was looking at programs in the Metroplex because of proximity, really. I didn't really want to relocate. And I would have gone to Tarleton State University in Stephenville, but they don't have a graduate level performance degree in choral music, which is really what I wanted. And they do have a music ed program, graduate level, but not a conducting program. And so I asked a few people that I trusted, where should I be looking for grad school, and so I called a few places. I went out to Arlington and met with Karen Keniston French, and ended up going to UTA. But it was one of those sort of whirlwind situations where she was like, "Hey, look, I've got a positioning opening up next semester." And I was like, "Oh, wow." I was, really not thinking it would be that soon, but it was. And so here we find ourselves. 2 years later, I had a degree, or another degree, rather.
Yeah.
So, so that's sort of my educational journey, academic, quote unquote, academic journey, as it were.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's cool that the church has been a really big part of your life. Well, in general, first of all, it's good for anybody, but also in regards to like your musical journey. And that's kind of something that we kind of mentioned it, I think, when we were talking to Abigail, just about like ways you can get involved in choirs, like outside of, your school. But yeah, the church is a really, choir, and that's something to think about too. I mean, if you're a parent or something, and you want your child to get involved in music, and regardless of what you believe, I mean, church can still be a really good place for extracurricular stuff.
Well, and I think
meet people.
I think, especially when I was a kid, there were a lot more church music programs in. I'm so old. I'm the ripe old age of 35. There were a lot more church music programs that had choral programs for children in the 90s than there are now, which is one of the reasons I think that groups like Chorus Abilene are just so important.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, if you want your child to have that musical experience, a group like Chorus Abilene is a great place to start that, if you don't have a program like that at your church.
Like in my early years, my first collaborative experience with like a group like choir was in church, like children's choir. So
yeah, same here. I remember constantly, I'm trying to think to my early years in church. I mean, I know we sang like, there's like your nursery, you know, Jesus loves me.
VBS.
Yeah,
too.
VBS
Sure,
stuff. Yeah. And then same with like elementary school. I don't know how, you know, y'all's experience was with elementary music, but I remember, so apparently we actually did have a choir in our elementary school. For some reason, I don't remember that at all because I was not in it. But even in our normal elementary music class, we did every month, we would have like a school assembly.
Right.
And then at the assembly, all the students of a certain grade would sing a few songs that they had learned in the music class. And it was like, you know, your elementary, it's like pop style, but it's, you know, for elementary schoolers. But that's
out of the Silver Burdetkin
textbook,
probably.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And but those are like my earliest memories of singing in a group of students and doing that. And it's so easy for me to forget about all of that because it was just, you know, it was elementary school and you just kind of go through it. But it's like, man, that was
so important.
It was so
really
important.
I think it's easy to take it for granted too.
Yeah.
Because, and I fall into this. I'm sure there are other church musicians or other, I guess, in particular, leading adults. You know, you come up against this issue like, well, I can read it.
Yeah.
I can read what's on the page. What, like, what's the deal? Like, here it is. Here's the music. You know, have at it.
Yeah.
But you know, that's not always the case. And so I think probably, for example, in our music ministry, we even in a college town where there's a pretty high level of academic sort of intelligence, that like measurable intelligence. Even in our group, there are a lot of people that can't read music. And so I think it's really important for us to sort of understand the importance of that, and then, you know, extend that opportunity to as many kids as we possibly can.
Yeah, it truly is an investment. Like that's literally what it is. And a lot of, I mean, even for me, I remember at that age, I mean, I enjoyed music. I even as a kid, I loved listening to movie soundtracks and stuff, probably even more than the next kid. But even then, I don't remember particularly thinking, oh, I love singing here in my music class. You know, like because it's just
I can't relate to that one.
Yeah, well, and it's probably more of a boy thing, I'm sure. But and because sometimes at that age, like kids are like, why do I have to do this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know?
No, there are sometimes, I always talk about this, but my elementary teacher would literally make us sing the national anthem every day.
Every day?
Oh,
every
snap.
day.
Wow.
Which
you're never forgetting those words.
I will never forget them. And which is nice, but like at that point I was like, are you kidding me? Like by fourth grade,
funny.
4th and 5th grade, we were all like, okay, can we please?
Sure. I think for us it was My Country 'Tis of Thee.
Yeah. That one too.
I don't think I remember a like sort of a regularity of singing the national anthem. We did, but only at like occasions.
Yeah.
In elementary school music, I'm fairly certain we sang My Country 'Tis of Thee, like maybe with morning announcements even.
I mean, really?
Oh,
you know?
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm the odd one out here because I didn't learn either of those. I didn't learn the national anthem until like my senior year of high school.
Wow.
No, you
Like,
did not.
Yeah, but like at that point, that's not even anyone's fault. That was just my fault. Like it's not like until I was like, okay, I guess I'll try singing the national anthem at a football game. So I guess I better learn the words.
Right.
But anyways, I had a question. Since you predominantly work with like adults, how is that even with like your church and then like chamber singers because chamber singers is probably more well-rounded musicians and kind of know more than the church musicians. So like, what's the difference? And
I think you mean versus working with like middle school or high school students, elementary students.
Yeah, and just like what's been your experience like whenever you first started? Was it a little hard because since you're both, a lot of them may be older than you or same age? Is there like a power balance sometimes, or at the beginning was it?
I think in some cases there can be, but in most cases there's not.
That's good.
Even at Westminster Presbyterian here in Abilene, when the entire ensemble showed up, we were talking about 14 people. The entire group, which was never,
Yeah.
It was, Christmas, we would have, 14 people in the group.
Yeah.
But even then, and that was a fairly sort of intelligence-packed ensemble too. There were at least 3, I think, college professors in that group, so it was like those people and their spouses, and so they sort of had that.
Yeah, you kind of have a little bit
that
of
sort of combination there, but also they sort of understood that whoever was in front of that group, that person was in charge.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so it was a really positive experience in that regard. So I've never really had an issue where for example, because I'm a church musician, so I work mostly with amateur musicians. Almost on the level of a D. Romines type, where with the classical chorus, where most of those people are not professional musicians. You have a few in there, like y'all, but the majority of that group is people who just genuinely love to sing.
Yes.
And that's kind of like how church groups are. But I don't think I've ever had a situation where a person is like, look,
That's good.
I've been singing for longer than you've been alive, which is always true because I'm only 35, and so, I was singing with, Robert Shaw or Bev Henson in 1982,
Trust me, there's no release right there.
Yeah. Well, because you didn't do it the way this guy does it. Thankfully I've never had that before.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I guess that's something I haven't really thought about, though, is I wonder if I feel like the biggest difference between like a beginner, well, I say beginner student, but I guess technically a beginner would probably be like a really young student. But like for me, like I joined choir like at my junior year of high school. That was the first time I'd ever done, high school choir since elementary school, that kind of thing. So that was still really new to me. I wonder what the difference kind of between a student who has just started kind of to do singing versus like a full grown adult.
An adult
that
starting
is, like,
their journey.
Started to, I feel like there'd be a difference like in, obviously like in just maturity in general, like, but like as far as like coming to the actual on the musical side of things.
I think in general, you mentioned maturity. I think with adults, you have the, I guess just a respect for expertise that a child wouldn't have.
Yeah, that's right.
So like, with a teenager, that kid, they don't care who you are. They don't care how many degrees you have. They don't care who you've sung with before. But with an adult, they're gonna respect the fact that you've at least done this for a little while, and it's all you do. So. For example, we have a few education professors in our choir at First UMC Stephenville. There is not one thing I understand or know about higher education. I just don't. Even though I sort of technically worked in higher ed for 2 years when I was in grad school. There's so many of the sort of intricacies that I don't understand. I would never presume to walk up to that person and say, hey, look, you're doing this wrong. Something's going wrong in your program. That's like, I'm never going to say that.
Yeah.
And I think the same applies to them. It would be pretty anathema for them to just walk up to me and say, hey, listen, I really don't like the way you're interpreting this, fermata or whatever in this Bach chorale, whatever.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty unlikely.
And I feel like if there's a high school students that's saying that to you, well, I guess they need to be put in their place, but also
I think it becomes a teachable moment.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
That's the hope anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also thinking, man, if a student were to be doing that, maybe they shouldn't be doing that, but also they must have a passion for music if they're right. If they're getting that involved in the process.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, and this applies to some adults too, in a lot of cases when a kid walks up and they have that kind of concern, it's because they heard somebody say that, or they heard a recording of some group that they really respect doing it, such and such a way, and so this is the way. This is the right way.
Yeah, there's only
this is live art. There's no one way to do it.
Exactly. I should clarify that for the people listening. When I say put in their place, I don't mean like genuine questions about the music and the musicality. That's a good thing. I'm saying like, well, I think it should be this way.
I had like 2 high school students who were, passionate about music.
Yeah.
And sometimes, obviously, I make mistakes in the classroom, but they would, in a nice way, tell me like, "Oh, well, that's actually like a half note, and you cut us off too early, or whatever."
Right, yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, it's a humbling moment for me," and and it makes me glad that they're like,
they're paying attention,
paying attention, and feel comfortable enough to be like, "Hey, I think you missed it this time," but
yeah, that's something that I think Dr. Romines has always talked about before. Is he says, well, a lot of times he says it in the context of like just him wanting us to watch him, say he's conducting, but he says like one of the biggest things for that too is he's like I need you to keep me accountable for my conducting, right? And it's like that's actually a helpful teaching tool for a lot of for students as well, because it's like what was it that he said? I think he said it when we interviewed him. He said good students make good teachers. And it's not necessarily just saying that a good student is going to become a good teacher. It's saying that the student themselves makes the teacher better.
Sharpens the teacher. Sure. And I think that's especially true. I taught when I was still in Abilene. I taught voice for 2 years to help make ends meet, and so it was so amazing how much that sharpened my forget about musical skills, teaching skills, like sort of pedagogy. It sharpened that really quickly. I wouldn't say easily, because you still have to work at it, but I totally agree with that statement. I'm also sort of hearing D. Romines' voice when he was, he would say things like, if you don't look at me, I can't help you. Sort of hold his hands up. If you don't look at me, I can't help you.
I think it happened Thursday. We had a rehearsal, and everybody was just like
just
music.
Buried in the book.
And I was looking at him, and he was just like, like kind of stopped conducting for a moment.
Since y'all can't see, Carol was looking around aimlessly. That's what he was doing.
I'm watching you, Dr. Romines.
I always think it's the funniest thing, but like I always feel bad when I'm like wasn't looking. Also, when him, or not just him, I've seen other conductors do it where they hold a pause way longer than you thought it was going to be, or just to kind of actually test you to see if you're actually watching. And it's like
because like a lot of times, especially with amateurs, you end up you'll hold the fermata or whatever it is, and you'll sort of hold it a little bit longer, but you find that people will only look up either right before you get there, when you get there, or like halfway through.
Yes.
And it's like, this is
like, shoot,
this hand right here. That's you. That's you.
Yeah,
if I'm looking at you, that's you. This is who we're communicating with. So that's always a struggle.
One thing I remember, one of the things that happened the other day was, and I guess this was going back to his rehearsal technique. He said, he always would count us in. He almost always counts that for that group. He counts in a lot.
Yeah.
And then there was one time where he didn't count us in,
and we didn't come
no, barely anyone came in, and he was like, "Oh, there it is. I didn't count in." And
I've taught you something.
The training wheels were ripped off, and boom.
I love it. Yeah, so. I can hear his voice saying that too. Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned just watching or eye contact or whatever. But I was in a rehearsal 2 days ago with someone that I've sung with several times, and I'm like the sort of quintessential choir nerd. So like all I want to do is watch that conductor and make sure I'm learning something. Because hopefully I've done my work before I came to rehearsal. And so I was watching our conductor, and just And he ended up just making an awkward amount of eye contact with me. And so I was okay, I'm the entire tenor section now, because he'll just hone in.
That's something Dr. Romines also said. He's like, I look at the people who look at me.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. I found that in grad school too. If the tenors were going to get glared at in grad school, I was going to be the recipient of that glare.
It's the person that's doing it right.
Yeah,
that's
right.
taking.
Yeah. I've noticed
that becomes accountable for the entire section, the whole group,
it's like
whatever.
A snowball.
I've noticed that to be true, like on the other side, because now that I've just finished my first year teaching, like I'm my first year conducting a group of people. There, I have 1 or 2 leaders in every group, and every time they're always looking at me, I'm going to look at them. So it's very, I think that's really accurate.
Let us take a quick break real quick so I can tell you a little bit about this podcast's primary sponsor, which is Christian Fortner Music. That's right, my own music business. This is the primary platform that I use to sell my music, and you can find it at www.christianfortner, that's Fortner, music.com. Now, you may be thinking, I don't know, this guy is a young composer. Does he really know what he's doing? Well, to be honest, none of us composers really know what we're doing, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. But if you want to kind of get an idea of what my music might be like and if it might be a good fit for your ensemble, you can actually get a free copy of music from me. That's right, a free piece of music. This isn't just a study score. This is full score and parts that you can use for your ensemble to perform completely for free. And you can do that by signing up for my mailing list. So if you go to my website, Christian Fortner, that's Fortner, music.com/mailings, you can sign up for my mailing list right there, and you'll get a link in your inbox where you can select a piece of music for either choir, string orchestra, or band. And I should also mention that the choir piece, it can be either an SAB, SA, or TB version. So for any of you out there that are looking for SAB, SA, TB, specific voicings like that, then this might be a good opportunity for you. So that's about it. Again, if that's something you'd be interested in, just check it out on my website. And now we can get back to the episode.
Since you kind of work with amateur musicians, and they're what kind of techniques do you use, or do you go through small little music theory lessons with them or anything during rehearsal, or
sometimes?
Or do you have time for that?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So sometimes we do. Sometimes I sort of. I think to bring levity to any rehearsal, it's important to. In fact, I went to a session, I think it was at ACDA one year. I went to a session about comedy in a choral rehearsal.
Oh, that's cool.
That is
which
cool.
is, and it was part of the church music division.
Oh, wow.
And which is, for any church group, community group, any ensemble that's made up of amateurs, I think that's important. But every now and then, if there's I think something to be learned theologically, I'll include some form of music theory in there. So a lot of times, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that happens a lot more in our worship band than it does in chancel choir, or at least it sort of jumps out at me more. And maybe I might be just guilty of taking it for granted in chancel choir because I know that literature a lot better.
Sure.
For anybody who doesn't know me, I guess I'm a choral musician first, and I sort of, that's what I do best. And so I'm very open with our worship band and with our church that this is not something that I was trained in. I'm sort of hard knocks trained in that, so I sort of come at it from the perspective of a classical choral musician. But I play the piano and I sing every week and I lead that worship band. And so generally speaking, they teach me a lot more than I teach them. So sometimes they're to answer that question, there are sometimes music theory questions that can be answered in that way. What was the other part of that? It was about music theory and...
just techniques, maybe on the choral aspects, to get them to produce a certain sound.
I think, generally speaking, for choral tone, I think for us the the best way we teach that is through the vocalies at the beginning of each rehearsal. Sometimes I tell them this is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Sometimes I literally will just I'll take a chunk of the hard piece that we're working on that night, and I'll take a chunk of that and I'll make a vocalese out of it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Good,
and so we'll just to something like Alleluia or Praise God Almighty, or something that sort of fits the meter of that.
Could you give us an example? I don't want to have you just think off the top of your head, but what does that process look like for you? Because that's really cool.
I wish. Well, let's see. There's a setting of the Jubilata Deo by Peter Anglia. I took one little chunk, which I'm kind of blanking on right now. I wish I had it in front of me. But I took one little chunk of that, and I think it might have been the first Wednesday that we read the piece. They had never seen it before. So I did two things. I took a chunk of it and made it, I think I just made it Alleluia, which was probably the easiest thing. And it's this particular chunk of the piece is, I think it's 4, 5, 6 bars of hemiola. So you've got one, I think it's the ladies that are singing in triples and the men are singing in duples, and then they swap. So it's not like you can, it's not like you can really do it one way with one group and then with the other. You kind of have to do both at the same time. Yeah. And so I chose that and just had them sing. I think it was just the soprano or the soprano alto part, because right then it's only 2-part. At least I think I'm remembering that right. And had them just sing like Alleluia, 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 or whatever melody it was right then. And I tried to beat a 2 pattern through that, because I was pretty sure at the time that that's what I was going to do when we were actually performing the thing and rehearsing it. And it worked to a reasonable degree, but it was one of those things that sort of took shape over the 6 or 8 weeks that we were working on it. So I did 2 things. I did that, and I also played the recording for them of the piece, so that they could get an idea of what it was supposed to sound like. And so I don't do that especially often. I sometimes, every now and then, if we're on a time crunch or something, I'll like post a recording, like a YouTube video on our church website, and refer them to it. But generally speaking, I don't like to do that, because then you sort of model your own performance after the recording, and I don't want them to do that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because I want them to do it like I want them to do it.
Yeah.
Not like, whoever, even if it's, somebody really respected. Not every technique works for every ensemble, and certainly not for a small, 18 or 20 voice church choir.
I think that's a really good tool, though, just on creating examples and kind of
I think I mentioned this in a previous interview, but whenever I went to TMEA this last year, I went to a session. Denise Eaton, she led it and was kind of talking about different. It was amazing. That was my favorite.
A rock star too.
That was the first one I went to, and I think that was my favorite session. I learned so much, and so she just kind of talked about the way she incorporates like her repertoire into her warm-ups or like sight reading, and so she would take the melodic contour of each line, sprint, SATB, take away all like the rhythm and just make them like all quarters or all just whole notes.
Dumb it down.
And then make that the sight reading. So it makes them familiar with just like the contour. And I thought that was like, wow, I've never thought about that. So I did that with my groups, and it worked really well.
That's a great tool, and that works. I would assume that works not just for choir, but also for other instrumental ensembles as well. I mean, you don't have, text or vowel shape, but like you still have so many other components that you can still kind of dumb down like that. When y'all are describing like taking the original music and then reformulating it to like fit for a warm up, make it a little more simple and stuff. Sure. I have the picture in my mind from the first Iron Man movie. I don't know if you've seen that, but in that first movie, if any of y'all listening haven't seen it, when he first builds the original Iron Man suit, and it's this big, he's trying to like escape this cave.
Oh yeah, right.
He builds this giant, like chunky, just out of a bunch of scraps and stuff.
Right,
it's huge. And it's just enough for him to escape out of the thing. Well, later, once he decides to make the actual Iron Man suit, he like pulls out this big like virtual like 3D diagram thing, and he's like grabbing like pieces, and he like grabs a whole huge chunk, and he's like, all right, we don't need that, and he goes and like just jumps in this little like virtual trash can, and it like makes the suit, it makes it look way smaller and more efficient. But like, I mean, like I have that same kind of picture of like, that's what you're doing with going from the original music to the warm up to this big whole thing to just, all right, trimming off the fat here. And, all right, now we just have this little thing that's easier. It makes it easier and more efficient.
It's crazy how accurate that is, because you end up taking what the group can do. Yeah. And sort of asking yourself, is this is this something that can really communicate the sort of the rehearsal goal to them, and is this something that I can teach them? If we're singing in Latin, like for example on this setting of the Jubilate Deo, we're going to sing a lot of Jubilate Deo, Jubilate Deo, and so we have to work on really sort of pure vowels, and we have to work on unified vowels. We can't just all sing like our version of the oo vowel. You have to be the same oo vowel as the person next to you. And there was no better training for that than singing it at UTA. Somehow Dr. Keniston figured out a way to make those vowels sound so like it was one person. Wow. Singing those vowels. It was pretty incredible. So
it's like you're focusing on it, kind of going back to I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but a lot of people in the business world talk about the 80-20 principle, which is where it's like 20% of what you're selling is gonna provide 80% of your income or something like that, or just like it always divides up, or 20% of people in your life may be causing 80% of the stress in your life, and stuff like that. Right. And it's like you're kind of focusing on the 20% aspect of the performance that's going to ultimately affect 80% of it. Because if you don't have all those vowels right, then that affects pitch, and then that also affects confidence, and then the overall tone and sound and stuff like that.
I think as far as leadership goes, I think the inverse is also true. Yeah. And Kara, I'm sure you've experienced this in teaching. When you ask a choir, an ensemble to do something, in my experience, they're going to do about 20% of what you model toward them. Yeah. So like, if we're trying to get them to sing louder, you better be singing that 6 forte Verdi. It's going to be a loud example. Yeah. Then maybe the group will sing the 1F or the 2Fs that you're asking from. I think that's at least as much true for adults as it is for teenagers. Yep.
Yeah, and going back to the teaching proper vowels, the only way I can get my middle schoolers to understand like tall vowels is for them to sing. I tell them like sing like you're a British person. Yeah. Yeah. And immediately it's like.
That's good.
That's all I had to say. And it fixed so many problems. Right. I was like, did you guys hear that? And they're like, yeah, it sounded good. Keep doing it. Yeah. But that's definitely true. The modeling, like over exaggerating what you're wanting them to do helps.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, even in any professional ensemble, with the exception of one, so yeah, every professional gig that I've ever had, with the exception of one, the conductors will always exaggerate. There's almost always a value to that, because you filter things through you put things through a filter of what you think you can actually do as a performer, and it sort of homogenizes over across the ensemble, or at least hopefully it homogenizes across the ensemble.
Cool. I was wanting to ask you, I kind of thought of this while you were talking about your background a little bit and how you were saying you are like a choral musician first, right? And you kind of communicate that whenever you're teaching.
Sure.
So I'm sure we have people listening to this that may be kind of in your same shoes where they really first and foremost like to perform, you know, or maybe they majored in performance in college, but they also know, well, there's a good chance I'm probably still going to have to, you know, get certified or, you know, in order to be able to make a living. And they very well may have to go into do teaching, whether it's private voice or, you know, opera or choir or whatever that may be. You know, what advice or any what tips do you think you would have for people that are kind of in that situation where someone that maybe didn't necessarily grow up wanting to teach a whole lot, but they did really want to perform, but they do know, okay, well, I'm still going to have to teach, but they're not really sure kind of what that's going to look like or what would be good advice for that?
I think, I mean, first, we sort of have to get over the mentality that we're only going to be performing. I think the number of musicians on planet Earth that do nothing but perform is a small fraternity of people. And I was in school both at UNT and Hardin-Simmons with tons of people who were under the delusion, frankly, that they were going to be, you know, singing on the Met stage at age 25. And I think that's true of maybe 0.5% of people that, frankly, make it through the Met auditions. You know, so I think the delusion that we're all just going to be, you know, doing 100% of what we want to do all the time as a living, making a living doing that is it's really delusional, I think, probably to just assume that. And so I think that's something that just sort of needs to be taken into account. The other thing, sort of mentally, emotionally, that we have to think about is the inverse of that. The number of things that we're going to have to do to, you know, make ends meet, to sort of expand our network so that we can get that next gig, is really important to think about too. I've been singing in professional groups one way or another since 2008. And the thing that got me the next gig more than anything was who I knew and who I had the opportunity to audition for, perform with, one thing or another. And so anytime I have a chance to do that, and you know, for it's not the same for everybody. I'm not married. I don't have kids, so I can sort of pick up at the drop of a hat and leave Stephenville if I can or if I have to go take a gig. But if I have the opportunity and if I'm going to break even, I'll take the gig. And frankly, for no other reason than the network, and so that I can sort of become established, and so people will know that Travis is going to show up and he's going to do his job and he's going to be prepared when he gets there, and word like that gets around. And the opposite is true too. If you show up and you if you haven't done your work, you know, if you show up to rehearsal and you're sort of, you know, behind the guy next to you or whatever, and it's just, it's gonna, you know, that gets around too. So it's I really, you know, work hard to be practicing ahead of time. I'm not sure if that, I mean, I hope that sort of answers the question of you know, maybe what if we're sort of pressed into something that we were not intending to get into as a career. But I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many teachers I know, both music teachers and otherwise, who never intended to go into teaching as a career, but end up awesome at it and loving it.
Yeah.
And my best friend is a good example of that. He has a background in history and philosophy, and ended up teaching history and is really awesome at it. So I think it's just one of those things that sort of life happens, and you know, sort of demands upon your time and your schedule precipitate changes in your profession, in your life.
Yeah. And I think another thing too is like, I mean, I don't know, everyone's situation is different, but I would imagine there are some performers out there that are like, okay, I'm gonna have to teach, but I majored in music, but I didn't do education. I don't know if I'm really, cut out to do this. And I look at you as an example. I mean, you were kind of like, in a similar boat in a way. And but you said yourself, like you learned so much.
Oh yeah.
Just from teaching. Like it's so easy to think like, and I can't remember which episode, but we talked kind of something like this on one of the other episodes too, where, you get lots of good tools in college, but you almost don't truly start learning till you're teaching.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. It's so easy to sort of get out of college and think, all right, I've got all the tools now.
Yeah.
I'm ready. We're going to just get out there and kill it.
Yeah.
And then you get out there and it's like, oh man, this is hard.
You kill it, but in a really bad
way.
way.
That's right. Yeah. It's sort of the opposite of what you had intended.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are always, I think, situations and opportunities for growth and improvement, regardless of the environment that you end up in. And there are always situations where the people around you are going to sort of sharpen what you end up doing, your sort of finished product, I guess you would say.
That's
sort
great.
of from Wednesday evening to Sunday morning for church musicians, it's going to be a situation where you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
Whether it's what you wanted to learn, is another question entirely. Because sometimes we learn things about ourselves that we thought, boy, I really thought I was better than that, and it turns out you're not.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to ask that I kind of going back to the 80-20 thing, I was just kind of thinking of too is one other unique thing about, you leading a church group is that, now correct me if I'm wrong, but you're primarily only rehearsing like once a week, right?
Yes.
So that's something that's very different than, being in a school where you're probably going to rehearse every day or at least every other day.
With, the chamber singers, we have 2 major rehearsals.
Yeah.
And then the gig right afterwards.
Yeah. And so
which, that kind of requires some practice time on your end.
Exactly.
Sure.
And that's definitely true with the chamber singers. It's kind of a part of the contract of we're expecting you to definitely get a lot of that done on your own. But I'm thinking with a group like a church choir, obviously, I'm sure a lot of them, I would hope some of them practice outside. You may be thinking, I don't know, but
hopefully our choral scholars practice outside rehearsal.
Exactly.
I'm not so much, probably not assuming that about the volunteers.
Yeah, but with that being said, so since you only get one chance a week or maybe 2 if you rehearse before service, to really rehearse, you probably have to really decide what are the few, and we only have hour, 2 hours, however many, a week to, you have to find the specific things that are going to make the biggest impact on the performance and everything.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I'm going to reach into my bag now and find my rehearsal plan for this past Wednesday.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, go for it.
In the summer, we really only have, generally speaking, I'll stay roughly 6 weeks ahead on rehearsal, sometimes more. And so, 6 anthems is what we're working on. We're working on one for Sunday and the following 5 weeks. But in the summer, Stephenville is a college town. And so the professors, they're out, they're on vacation. The students are gone. the population dips to like, if we have 10 on Sunday, I'm like, yay, praise God. We had 10 people in the group. But that also, because of that, it affects Wednesday evening rehearsal. And so, especially this year, I've adjusted my plans to go from a 90-minute rehearsal on Wednesday evening to a 60-minute rehearsal. Not least because it's the summer, and stakes are a little bit lower.
Sure.
And so, we would try to give them a break, and we're not working on anything major really until September, when we start working for. We prepare a lessons and carol service every December, and so we start working on that music in September. But for this, and for those who obviously can't see this, I've got everything literally planned down to the minute.
Wow.
I've got 10 minutes of vocalization. I've got 6 minutes on only two of the hymns for Sunday, because I know they know the rest of them. So it's not really necessary for me to rehearse. For example, this coming Sunday, tomorrow, as we're recording this, June 12th, will be Trinity Sunday. And so the sort of ubiquitous hymn for Trinity Sunday is Holy, Holy, Holy. They know Holy, Holy, Holy. They've been singing it their entire lives. There's no reason for me to rehearse that. But I did want to rehearse the two things that the two of the pieces that we would do on our own, which is the choral call to worship and the choral call to prayer. And so I've written down those things, and they're easy, but I wanted them to have at least a little bit of sort of meaningful rehearsal time on those. So that went in there. And then I've got, a few minutes planned for each of these choral anthems that came after going all the way to July 3rd. And so I do plan that down to the minute. Sometimes that interferes, I'll be honest, sometimes that does interfere with the sort of social aspect of a choral rehearsal.
Sure.
Because with
Good.
The dog's going crazy. Sometimes that does interfere with the social aspect of rehearsal, because the majority of them are amateurs, and they're there to make music, and they're there to lead worship, but they're at least half are there. 50% of the reason why they came is to see the other people in the ensemble.
Yeah, it is important.
It's a community is a big part of any choral ensemble, and y'all have talked about that, I think, on previous episodes too. And so sometimes that gets in the way. And so I remember a few times in grad school, one of the things about going to grad school while you're working full time is that wherever you're working full time, that ensemble very quickly becomes your lab group.
Yeah.
So anytime, I would go to my lesson on like Tuesday morning with my conducting professor, and then Wednesday evening, whatever I was learning on Tuesday morning, that went into rehearsal on Wednesday evening. And so I could very quickly, very practically understand what was going to work and what wasn't going to work with them. Cool. And so one time my professor gave me an assignment to plan a rehearsal, and that's when I started doing this, plan a rehearsal down to the minute, and stick with it. And I did, and I did not regret it.
Cool.
But there was, I think, there were 2 or 3 assignments like that, maybe once each semester. She would require that of me, and so I would have to videotape it and send her the tape, or the tape.
Same thing.
The digital video file, whatever. And so I would have to send it to her so she could evaluate. But there were a few situations where a person would raise a hand and, I have a question. I'm sorry, I don't have time for questions. It's 7:38, and I've got to move on to the next piece that I've got 14 minutes planned on. So
it totally makes sense, though. One of the biggest things that I learned the first and last time I conducted a choir was, my senior year in college. We sang a piece that I wrote, and I got to conduct it. And one of the biggest things that stuck out to me of that experience of leading rehearsals is how fast Dr. Romine's like, he gave me like 10 minutes per rehearsal to go over my piece.
Right.
And it was crazy how fast the 10 minutes went by.
Yeah,
and
you have to be really intentional about what you're planning.
And a lot of times when you're on the singing end, it feels like you're rehearsing a piece for an hour, for days, and it's only 10 minutes. But when you're up on the podium, it's like, oh wow, I feel like we just sang this one phrase like 4 times and 10 minutes is over, right. Or something like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like that's one of those things that I've sort of rubbed against teachers in particular about. We have 2 professional choral conductors in our church choir. One of them is Ariel Sword. She is the choral director at Stephenville High School. And the other is Troy Robertson, who's the director of choirs at Tarleton State University. And both of them are brilliant teachers. And in different contexts with each person, I've come into a situation where they're one or the other or both. They'll say, "Boy, we really did a lot of music tonight." I'm like, we only did 6 pieces.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same number of pieces we did last week, and it's the same number we'll do the next week. But it was just a dense rehearsal, and probably not them, but church musicians or even myself personally will sort of come under scrutiny about trying to do like too much or one thing or another, and I think the question pretty often gets missed by teachers or others, in academia or other sort of ensemble contexts, which is that our ensemble performs every week, and so we only get, if I get 40 minutes of rehearsal time on a single piece over a 4, 5, 6 week period, most of the time I'm pretty lucky about that. And so, when I was in grad school, I would give them the entire semester's worth of literature. I would plan everything and give them the entire an envelope full of everything that we would do from, say, August through December. Yeah. I would give them everything. And people would say, "Boy, this is really a lot. You don't expect us to do all of this." Well, yeah, at some point.
At some point, yeah.
Not tonight. We're not going to do. I don't expect you to do. Everything. Between now and December, in one evening. But yeah, at some point I do. And so I think for just individual goals have to be taken into account. Our ensemble has a goal of leading worship once a week, every week, whereas a school group has an entirely different goal, which is teaching literacy, teaching how to perform, and frankly, sort of nuts and bolts, like how to walk on and off the stage in an orderly fashion. Good grief.
Oh, man.
I mean, logistical things like that, they take forever to do. And frankly, if I tried to do that with my church choir, if I tried to change something about that, it would take forever, to do something like that. And just, I think, concerns like that, vary so much from ensemble to ensemble. And so it's important to remember that those things are different, and one approach isn't necessarily sort of better or worse than the other. Simply because it differs from one's own experience. So,
cool. That's great. Well, our dog is vying for attention, but this has been a really good conversation. I think that's a good place. We can go ahead and start wrapping it up here. But Travis, thank you again for being on the show with
always,
us. Before you go, if you want to just kind of, I know you've already talked about it throughout the episode, but if there are any people, well, you can plug Chamber Singers, but then also if there are any people listening from the Stephenville area that are interested in your choir as well, just tell us about them.
So like I said before, I work at First UMC Stephenville, and if you're interested in coming to sing with a church choir, we meet every Wednesday, 7:00 in the sanctuary. And we have a handbell choir that's not meeting in the summer, but we'll meet again in, I think, late August, early September. I don't think that's exactly on the calendar yet. But at 6 p.m., also in the sanctuary. Our worship band meets on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. And like we're on, Facebook and Instagram, stuff like that. So I mean, if you just do a search for First UMC Stephenville, you'll find us.
Great.
So
and then what about Chamber Singers?
Chamber Singers, right? AbileneChambersingers.org is the website. Was Brady McNeil the last episode that y'all had?
He was as of once this comes out, it'll have been 2 episodes.
Okay. Yeah. So Brady, I think, is the latest person to have. Well, maybe not the latest. Anyway, they're set on the. This is a long sort of roundabout way of saying we have a contact form on our website. Okay. So if you feel like singing with Abilene Chamber Singers, there are absolutely no fees involved, and it's a pretty it's a much more truncated schedule than your sort of normal community group. And so. That works a lot better for some people who, if you have a busy schedule or something like that, you can't make a weekly meeting. And but there's a lot of overlap in our group from Chorus Abilene, classical chorus. D. Romines, the conductor of that ensemble, also sings with us.
And some of the college students around town.
Some of the college students around town sing with us. And so I think it's a good group to be involved with. And it's one that I certainly just absolutely love.
That's great.
Performing with.
You sing a lot of good repertoire as well.
Yeah, and the conductor of that ensemble, Josh Wright, he and we first met when we were 14 years old. when Clell moved their family to Abilene when he first came to Hardin Simmons, and it was one of those crazy situations. Josh and I, we had spent our whole lives like, oh man, someday, we'll get to like collaborate like this. Yeah. Now here we find ourselves.
That's
and so
great.
It's like,
that's great.
I've been buddies since 2001.
Cool.
And so here we are.
That's awesome.
As adult experts who know everything
That's
on
right.
choral music.
Y'all have made it. Cool.
Now, it's a fun group.
Do y'all require an audition?
We do require an audition, and it's just like on a case-to-case basis.
Because a lot of times you may already know some people's voices.
Yeah, and sometimes we've already sung with these people before. But the reason I mentioned Brady is because he contacted us through our website.
Yeah. Cool.
And so, he was brand new to Abilene. He had would he come straight from Alabama at the time?
Yeah.
And so he was coming here from another state. We never met this person. You want to audition? Heck yeah, man, come in and audition.
Yeah.
And so we met this guy. And we were like, oh yeah, you're in the group.
You're in. Oh yeah.
So I think recently we had another audition with another singer who I think had not sung for a while, and I think she told us that, and so Josh and I were like, okay, it's our duty to hear this person. She was incredible, and so it was like, oh yeah, you're on the roster. Yeah, you're good.
Cool.
So you're on the squad.
Awesome.
So, it was great.
Well, we'll be sure to put the links to both the websites for Abilene Chamber Singers and your church choir down in the description. So if any of y'all are interested, you can check it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's it. All right. Well, Travis, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Yeah,
it's great.
Always. Glad to be here.
Thank you.